So we've got these international problems, these international difficulties that essentially it feels like the realists are right. Um, but maybe we want some of these things to be better off than essentially the realists are going to leave us. Maybe we want a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And how do we get that? How do we get cooperation on that? How do you get cooperation on trade? How do you get cooperation on vaccine delivery? All those sorts of things. How do you solve this? And when I say solving the prisoner's dilemma, when I say solving this problem that we've set up, what we mean is getting the prisoners to cooperate, our NCNC sort of outcome. It's not the Nash equilibrium. It's not a thing that sort of happens on its own. The position on our game that happens on its own naturally, if that's the way you want to say it, is going to be to not cooperate. So are there things that we can do, and this is really what liberalism is really sort of pushing towards, are there things that we can do that can make cooperation more likely? And that's the thing. So does the game itself help us think about how we can solve this? So I want you to take a second and I want you to stop the video, well, after I say this. And I want you to go back to that game and I want you to see if you can figure out a way, what could you do to change the game so that cooperation is more likely? So go do that right now and then come back and we'll talk about it. Okay, good. You're back. So I'll just give you some things that we have talked about, or that not only do we sort of see in game theory, but we also see out there in the international realm about how this is done. So here's one easy one. An easy way that this can be done, not easy. Easy is not the right word. A basic way this can be done is repeating the game. Sometimes we call it iterated, meaning that you do the game over and over again. If I could do the game once, that Golden Balls video that you guys watched, that's the only time those two people would be doing that game. Would it be different? Would it be easier to get to cooperation if they knew they were going to be doing that game with each other 1,000 times? Like, okay, this game's done, do it again, do it again, do it again. Would it be easier? And it turns out that sometimes we can talk about one-shot games, like that Golden Balls game, where essentially they only did it once, or an iterated game where it happens over and over and over and over again. It turns out cooperation is easier in an iterated game. And one of the reasons is because you start to know more about the other person, right? They're strangers when they sit down at the table together. But after the 30th, 40th, 50th time that they've done that game, they cease to be strangers completely. In other words, they now know if the other person is a cheater. They now know if the other person is nice. They know a lot more about this. They know, they have more information, I guess is the way to say that. So, and then if we think about this at the international level, if we're talking about states don't just do one-shot games and that's it. They do these games over and over and over again. The US and the Soviet Union repeatedly interact. So we could say maybe that at the international level, it's not hopeless because we have these things like the game gets repeated over and over again. All right, another way we can sort of solve this is the constructivist idea of norms. So if we're thinking about this from the prisoner's dilemma, what would this look like? I'll give you one norm that is a part of, I don't know, prisoner lifestyle. I don't know, gangs, whatever. I'm not quite as criminal as you might think, but it's the no squealer rule. Snitches get stitches. This is a rule, right? Among, if there is honor among thieves, it's this sort of honor right here, is that you just don't do it. So look, you could tell the police, but if you do, now you're that guy. And there's just a sense in which I might think, look, even if I go to jail for 2 more years, I think it is wrong to squeal. And the more that norm gets created, the more likely cooperation between the prisoners can happen. Violators of this rule, this norm, are shunned or punished by the community. Other criminals won't work with them. They may even try to harm them in some way. At the international level, we might have the same thing where we talk about states that break deals or cheat on cooperation agreements. It just, all of a sudden, you're that state. You're a rogue state. You're kind of, ugh. Nobody wants to do anything with them. Constructivism would even add this element of it is right to keep quiet. It's not just a norm where you get punished, but it's states and prisoners and whoever in our story internalize that norm. And so, again, it's even if I don't get punished by the community, I still think it's wrong to break the agreement. Okay, so that's another thing, is developing norms. So at the international level, the more we have norms about cooperating, like, for example, we've talked about this before, the idea that multilateralism is a good thing. As long as we have that idea out there, then working together, multilateralism, is perceived in and of itself as a good thing. So cooperation may be more likely out of that. All right, here's another one. So, okay, so here's something they did. They, people who program stuff, that, academics, they have nothing better to do, so they sit around and come up with these games, and then they say, okay, how do we solve them? So what they did is they did this contest where they asked a whole bunch of people to submit a strategy to the Prisoner's Dilemma game, just like that guy in Golden Balls. Here's my strategy. My strategy is I'm going to say, I am going to cheat. I'm not going to cooperate with you. Now it's up to you as to what you're going to do. So what strategy do you want to do? And it turns out that there was one strategy that they put in these computers, and they ran this game thousands and thousands of times, two strategies against each other. Which strategy works the best? And it turns out that one strategy works way better than all the rest of them. It's something called tit for tat. The tit for tat strategy for an iterated game. That if you do this strategy, it doesn't matter what the other guy does, you're probably going to be better off than any other strategy that you could do. So here's the strategy in a nutshell. On the first game, the first time you play this game, you cooperate with the other person. Okay, so again, we're imagining that the two people can't talk, they're in separate rooms, just like our Prisoner's Dilemma, there's no communication between them. So on the first game, you cooperate. Did the other guy, so then you ask, okay, so the game's over, did the other guy or girl cooperate in the first game? If yes, then I'm going to cooperate in the second game. If no, then I don't cooperate in the second game. This is the tit for tat. Whatever they did in that game, I do in the next game. Okay? And then you repeat this for the third game and on and on. And studies show there is an incredibly high rate of cooperation that emerges from this. No matter what the other strategy the other person is, they can understand what the strategy is and figure out how to use it so it's beneficial to both players. But more importantly, beneficial to me. Like, it's the only way I'm going to benefit is by going along with this strategy. That's one of the reasons it works. And here's some of the reasons why it works. This tells us something about when cooperation is more likely at the international level. The other, I keep saying guy. I don't know why I'm using the term guy. The other person or state or whatever can understand your strategy easily. It's not complicated. It's very clear as to what you don't have to play this game, 6 or 7 times before you recognize every time I cooperate, they cooperate. Every time I cheat, they cheat. So, man, cooperation is going to be in my best interest all the time. It's easy to understand, even though you've never said a word with this other person. It's an easy thing to understand what's going on. Short-term punishment is short-term cheating is punished. So if I don't cooperate, I might benefit this game, but I'm not going to benefit the next game. So it's going to be a wash. So there's no real good benefit in me cheating at all. Like, if I cheat, I'm just hurting myself. And then another thing that this offers is what we call forgiveness. Essentially, there's a way to reestablish the relationship. If I recognize that I'm not going to cheat anymore, so I now start to cooperate, it may take a game, but the tit for tatter now will start to cooperate as well, and so you can reestablish this relationship that you can now sort of have. So These elements, while they seem pretty obvious, if you can enhance these elements at the international level, cooperation is more likely. That's part of the idea. All right. One more set of ways to win this game, or not to win this game, to solve this game, to get more cooperation. And that's going to be just changing the game. Are there things that can be done to change the basic parameters of the game? So, for example, I didn't really harp on this, but part of this game is that you have one prisoner in one room, one prisoner in another room. They don't know what the other person is going to do. Because they lack that information, you may be likely to assume that they're going to cheat. You have to assume the worst possible thing. So what if we change the game in such a way where the prisoners actually can talk to each other? We'll call this diplomacy. So if you can increase diplomacy, if you can have states talk to each other more, there's still this sense in which, even though you're telling me that you're going, like those two guys sitting at the table at the Golden Balls thing, they're talking to each other, but you don't know if the other person's going to cheat or not. But there is still information being passed back and forth there. Even if you can't fully trust the other, you still have more information that you can base your decision upon. Another thing you could do, instead of having prisoners talk to each other, is maybe you could have the prisoners watch each other. In other words, even though you're in a separate room, if I see you're about ready to confess, then I might confess too. But if I watch you and you don't look like you're confessing at all, well then I have no reason to confess either, possibly. Or it may be less likely that I will confess. So we call this monitoring. And again, this idea of the U.S. can't go into China, but maybe some other third-party entity like the UN or the World Trade Organization or something like that can go into China and report, here's what's happening in China right now. So it's monitoring. And because of that, you can make a more informed decision about whether you should cooperate or whether you should cheat. Another thing you could do is you could imagine that one of the prisoners is a millionaire and the other prisoner is flat broke. And so the one prisoner says, look, if you cooperate, I'll give you something. I'll give you $10,000 if you cooperate. These are what we call side payments, where essentially if you keep quiet, I'll make it worth your while. You incentivize them, you change the numbers that they have. While they're still going to jail for a while, that maybe a little more money might make it less likely that they'll decide cheating is a realistic possibility. The flip side of this, so if I can give you a benefit for cooperating, there's also the possibility of giving you an extra cost if you cheat. With prisoners, gangs, mafia, we call this the vendetta, where essentially if you squeal, I'll kill you. If you cheat on this, then we'll cut off all of your humanitarian aid. If you cheat on this, if you start to get a nuclear weapon, when you say you didn't, then we are going to bomb your facilities. Things like that. So there can be sort of, again, the side payments, the bonuses if you cooperate, but there's also the possibility of extra costs and punishments if you cheat. Now, to do this, in both of these cases, this threat in the vendetta or the promise with the side payment, it has to be credible. You have to really believe that I'm going to do this, or the other person is going to do this, the other state's going to do this. The United States says, hey, either you reduce your greenhouse gases by 5% or we will nuke your country. Now, that's a lot of extra costs. Like blowing up a country with nuclear weapons is a lot of extra costs. But if I'm sitting here in this country, I'm going, what are the odds that they're really going to nuke us? Very, very low. It's not a very credible thing. So it has to be a credible promise. It has to be something that is believable. And that requires reputation. If the United States has gone around and said, look, if you start to get nuclear weapons, we will invade your country and take you out of power. Now that sounds very incredible. Getting nuclear weapons, you're going to come in and you're going to invade our country. And then let's say that the United States does this in Iraq in 2003. It says, oh, we think you're getting nuclear weapons, Saddam Hussein. And then the United States goes into Iraq and removes Saddam Hussein. Now, when it turns to Libya and says, hey, Libya, if you start to get nuclear weapons, we're going to invade you, Libya goes, whoop, hold on a second. Now there's a reputation for that. I didn't think that was credible, but now you're getting a reputation that that's a credible thing. So I may be less likely to cheat on this. I may be more likely to turn over my nuclear weapons that I have, which is actually what Libya did. Okay, one more thing, and that's third-party enforcement. Is that even though we are in anarchy, there are still some groups, states, whatever, that may be willing, may benefit if cooperation happening in other areas. So this is what we call third-party enforcement. So with the prisoner's dilemma, it's an easy one, right? The two prisoners who are sitting here, what if they both belong to the mafia? Well, if they both belong to the mafia, they're probably not going to squeal. And the reason is because there is third-party enforcement. If I squeal on this guy and I get released, I walk outside of the jail and the mafia kills me. So I will cooperate with you and you'll cooperate with me because we know it's backed up by this third party. So like a mafia family or organized crime. Is there an IR equivalent of that? The UN, without saying it's a mafia, the UN does try to do things like that, but the World Trade Organization, a lot of these international institutions try to do this, but what they lack that the mafia has is like the United Nations and things like that. They just lack the force, the ability to use force. But we could talk about if there's equivalencies of this. The point of this, okay, let me just be clear for just a second. It's hard to sort of slide from prisoner's dilemma to international relations stuff. What this does is this tells us, okay, there are reasons why states do not cooperate. Does this dilemma, the prisoner's dilemma, does it tell us some things about how we can enhance the ability of states to cooperate? And that's really what liberalism is talking about, right? It says, look, yeah, for the most part, states are nervous of each other, but there are things you can do to make it easier for states to cooperate. It doesn't make it automatic for states to cooperate. They don't automatically cooperate. It's still hard work. They still have to overcome that Nash equilibrium of it's just, I don't have enough information, so I cheat. So what can we do to increase that information, to create institutions, technology, all that kind of stuff that allows for more cooperation or cooperation to be more likely? That's the whole thing. Okay, I got 2 more slides. We're going to come back and talk about those